"Ah, this is my driver," she said. Laughter echoed throughout the group. No one objected. He stood frozen, the smile on his face slowly fading. "You can go now and get back to work," his wife, Lila, continued to draw attention. The laughter continued to fill the air, but to him, it had no flavor, only a heart that felt like it was being suffocated. Now, make sure to leave your thoughts and lessons from this story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Kola had wanted to trust her, but on weekends, she often slept until noon, her eyes glued to her phone as she giggled at messages he would never see. When she looked at him, her eyes sometimes glanced over with a hint of boredom and disdain. He didn't know when it happened, but at some point, he went from being a partner to becoming just a background figure in her life. Lila's family loved him when he was the one fixing their cars for free or mowing their lawn. But now, they rarely called him. His friends no longer invited him out either. He was always busy, always working. Arthur, their son, was also growing more distant from him. He began to feel like he was invisible in his own life, silently moving through the rooms of the house, picking up after people who never noticed his presence. But he kept going. He was made to work, to provide, and to repeat. He drove late at night to pay off the debt for Lila's new BMW. He covered her mother's medical bills without a word of complaint. When Arthur needed braces, he sold his childhood comic book collection, the last thing he had left from his simpler days. The party was Lila's idea. She had been promoted, becoming the youngest partner at her firm. He was genuinely proud, but he felt quietly distant in her joy. He listened as she detailed every plan for the event, the rooftop venue in Buckhead, the servers, the specialty drinks, even the string quartet. He silently calculated the costs and then paid all the bills. He sold the custom-built motorcycle he had spent years perfecting just to pay off the final bill. The night of the party, it was hot and muggy, the air seemed to call out. He wore his best suit, clean and neat, trying to blend into Lila's atmosphere. She looked stunning, powerful, almost completely immersed in her new life. Arthur was at a friend's house. He took Lila to the car, opening the door for her as always. On the rooftop, the city sparkled beneath the lights. Lila was immediately drawn into conversations with her friends and colleagues. He stood silently outside, refilling her drink, adjusting her glass, handing the valet his tip. He was used to being in the background, but tonight, that feeling hurt in a different way. In the middle of the party, as the group of colleagues from her company gathered, Lila signaled for him to come over. He smiled, expecting an introduction, but instead, she simply waved her hand and said, "Oh, this is my driver." Laughter erupted from the group. No one objected. He stood frozen, his smile slowly fading as the group turned back to their conversation, continuing to talk about work. His ears seemed to ring. He walked to the bar, ordered a drink, and watched as Lila continued chatting with her colleagues. The humiliation didn't just come from the words, but from the way she so easily dismissed him, as if he were a stranger, as if an entire decade had never existed. He finished his drink and quietly left the party. The next morning, Lila didn't come home. She texted, "Staying with some friends, don't wait for me." No apology, no explanation. He stayed up all night, staring at the ceiling, remembering the times she used to hold his hand in the dark. The days that followed, something inside him shattered, then slowly healed. Lila began sleeping in the living room, to clear her head, as she put it. She barely spoke to him, except when she needed money, needed him to drive her to the airport, or to do some errands. Her family gradually began to avoid him. Arthur started to mimic his mother's attitude, glaring when he asked about homework. He lived in a house full of people, but it felt like living among strangers. His friends stopped calling. The neighbors he had once helped looked at him as though he were contagious. He didn't argue. He let it all wash over him like falling rain, continuing to drive, pay the bills, still showing up in a family that seemed to be falling apart right before his eyes. But every night, he began to think about an escape. Not for revenge, but for a path of his own. He remembered how his mother had always told him, always have a plan B. He began researching programs for veterans, small business loans, and grants. He read everything he could about auto repair shops, classic cars, and the classic car market in Lagos. He signed up for a veterans training program run by a local entrepreneur, and to his surprise, he was accepted. He didn't tell Lila. He quietly attended classes during lunch breaks and in the evenings when he could. He spent his evenings and breaks learning, taking notes, and planning. He picked up extra late-night driving shifts, saving every spare penny. He sold his insurance policy, withdrew all his savings, and even pawned his gold watch to raise money. Every week, he secretly deposited money into a separate account, one that Lila didn't know about. He found an old garage for rent in a quiet part of Lagos, a brick building with broken windows and an oil-stained floor. It was perfect. He signed the lease with his savings and a small loan from the Veterans Program. He named it Steel Forge, a name that held the legacy of his mother, of Detroit, and of all the rough edges that had shaped him. The first few months working at Steel Forge were far from easy. Kola woke up early, worked all day, and only returned home when it was dark. The old, worn-out cars were slowly repaired, restored, and brought back to their original beauty. Every time he finished a car, he felt as though he had created a work of art, even though it didn't receive any attention from the outside world. Kola's first customer was a classic car enthusiast, a wealthy businessman from the Lekki area. Kola worked tirelessly, with no hesitation or laziness, just to prove to himself that he could do it. The first compliment from that customer was a small but incredibly significant sign. It became the motivation for Kola to keep going, even though Lila and those around him seemed uninterested in what he was doing. A year passed, and his shop began to gain popularity. Customers started coming in, from car enthusiasts to businessmen looking for unique cars to own. Kola took great care with each car, from repairing them to refurbishing them. There were no flashy promotions or grand advertisements, just word of mouth from satisfied customers. His career grew bit by bit, and when he looked at his customer waiting list, he felt proud of what he had achieved. Lila never asked about his shop. She continued living in her world, with parties, business relationships, and meetings. Those meetings seemed to matter more than anything else to her. Occasionally, when Kola came home late, she would glance at him, offering no questions or words of encouragement. Once, after coming home late and feeling tired but content, Lila stood waiting for him in the kitchen, her eyes fixed on him with an expression of displeasure. "Where have you been all day?" she asked, her voice full of irritation. Kola simply replied, "At the shop." She looked at him, sarcastically, "You're driving for rich people, aren't you?" Kola didn't get angry. He quietly answered, "No. I'm building my shop." Lila looked at him, her eyes showing a flicker of surprise. "What shop?" she asked. He shrugged, saying nothing more. "It's okay," he simply said, then turned and walked away. A week later, Kola didn't come home anymore. He packed his belongings, left a note with his goodbye, and placed the house key on the table. There was no argument, no shouting. Just silence, the silence Lila would never recognize until it was too late. He drove away in his restored Impala, leaving that house behind, never looking back. He didn't need to explain, didn't need to argue. He had a new life now. Lila didn't call him. Arthur, their son, only sent a single text, "Why did Dad leave?" Kola replied, "Call me when you want to talk." But that call never came. Kola started a new life. He rented a one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, close to his shop. Every day, he woke up early, made breakfast for himself, and worked at the shop all day. Each night, he returned home, cooked simple meals, and took care of himself. On weekends, he fixed old bicycles, just like he used to do during his days of struggle. He reconnected with his sister in Detroit, sending money back to their mother. The sorrow in his heart gradually faded, like waves crashing against the shore and then receding. 2 years passed, and Kola had completely changed. He was no longer the man drowned in the shadow of a broken marriage. He had become a free man, with a job he was proud of, and a life he had built with his own 2 hands. One summer afternoon, as Kola was driving back from a client, he stopped at a gas station to refuel. As he stepped out of the car, a familiar voice called his name. It was Monica, an old friend of Lila's from her company. "Malik. Long time no see," she said, her face a little awkward, her feet stumbling slightly. He nodded and responded coldly but politely, "Hello, Monica. How's everything?" Monica seemed flustered, then hesitated before speaking. "Have you heard about Lila?" Kola shook his head, pretending not to care. "No, I haven't heard." Monica lowered her voice and shared the struggles Lila had been going through. She ran into big trouble at the company last year. Lost a lot of funds. Lila's been having a really hard time. She lost her house, and her boyfriend left her. Monica said, looking at Kola with sympathy in her eyes. "I wish you all the best." Kola simply smiled. "Such is life, everything can change," he said, but inside, there was no bitterness. He only felt an unusual sense of peace. A few days later, when Kola was at the market unloading his groceries into the car, he saw Lila. She had changed so much. She looked tired, her hair loose, and her high heels worn down. She was struggling to carry a few bags of cheap groceries, her face full of disappointment. Lila looked at him, and for a moment, it seemed like she was about to call out to him. But Kola just glanced at her once, giving a gentle nod. He didn't stop. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove past her without looking back. He didn't need to say anything. He had found his life. A life that didn't require apologies or forgiveness. A life of peace, built with his own hands. That night, he sat on the balcony of his apartment, holding a bottle of beer, watching the sun set over the quiet part of Lagos. The whole world seemed to have quieted down. He didn't have a wife, no lavish parties, no compliments from his son or anyone around him. But he had a successful job, a free life, and self-respect. He didn't need to seek approval from anyone. Because he had learned an important lesson from his mother, build your own peace, and the world will chase after you. And as he looked down at the city lights, Kola smiled for the first time in years. At last, he had truly found the peace he deserved. Nothing lasts forever. Sometimes, life can change unexpectedly, and Lila never anticipated that events would unravel all the illusions she had carefully built after leaving Kola, the man she had emotionally abused for years. Even though Kola had left her, no longer caught up in the parties or the extravagant social circles, Lila found herself more and more desperate for social validation, for recognition in the eyes of others. She sold the BMW that Kola had paid off, the car she loved, to invest in a high-end project she believed would lead her to a prosperous and ultimate life of freedom. She spotted a luxury apartment in a posh resort area in the southern part of Lagos, near the beach. She thought it would be the place to build her new life, where she would continue to shine and be admired. But what Lila didn't know was that life wasn't always as beautiful as it seemed on the outside. She found information about the apartment through a highly professional website, full of detailed information about the location, prices, and accompanying luxury services, all recommended by her supposedly closest friend, D-Hill. She contacted the agent, a man named Oseji, who made an incredibly tempting offer. Oseji didn't just promise lucrative opportunities, he convinced Lila that it was the perfect time to invest in the booming real estate market in the area. "Lila, I assure you, if you invest here, within a year, the value of this property will double. This is an opportunity no one can afford to miss," Oseji said, his voice full of persuasion. "With your funds, we'll take care of all the paperwork. You just need to transfer the money, and the apartment will be yours." Driven by greed and her lack of understanding about investments, Lila quickly transferred all the money she had, including the proceeds from selling the BMW and her long-saved funds. She even mortgaged her parents' house to borrow more money for the project. "This will really make me the queen of this city. I'll own a prime property in Lagos," she thought. Everything seemed to go smoothly until a week later when she realized there was no apartment, and Oseji had disappeared. She called, texted, but all communication methods were met with silence. Lila's heart sank as she realized she had been scammed. Her family fell apart, her mother cried every night, and her father had to be hospitalized because of the stress caused by his daughter's misfortune. Lila had lost everything. Not just the apartment, but also the BMW, her savings, and everything she had worked hard for over the years, all at the cost of her family. Everything in her life suddenly came crashing down, and she began to feel an overwhelming emptiness in her soul. She realized she had lost herself in meaningless ambitions. Her situation grew worse. She had to move out of the apartment she had been renting and now lived in a cramped room in an old apartment building. Friends, colleagues she had once cherished, now turned their backs on her. She was no longer the woman everyone admired. Her life had become a dead end. In the midst of her crisis, Lila suddenly remembered Kola, the man she had once deemed unimportant, the man she had hurt, the man she had lost. But as everything fell apart, Lila realized that Kola was the only one who could help her, not because she needed money, but because he was the only one she could trust. Lila stood in front of Steel Forge, where Kola was still working tirelessly, his hands calloused and his gaze unwavering. She hesitated before stepping inside, but the pride of a woman who once had it all crumbled within her. She was no longer the powerful Lila she once was, only a woman who had failed, with no support, no one by her side. Kola was working on a classic car when she entered the shop. He looked up at her. His eyes held no hatred, no pity, just silence. "Lila?" Kola asked, his voice gentle but firm. Lila stood still, unsure of what to say. She simply shook her head, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. "I need help," she sighed, her voice choked with emotion. "You're the only one I can turn to." Kola looked at Lila for a long moment, then he set the wrench down. Over the years, he had faced many challenges and hardships, but he had learned that sometimes forgiveness wasn't for the other person, but for oneself. He sighed deeply, then finally spoke. "I'll help you, but you need to understand this isn't because of who you are, but because of what you've done in the past. I'm helping you not to get something back, but to help you learn to stand up and rebuild your life." Lila nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. She knew she no longer had the right to demand anything. But she also knew that without Kola's help, she wouldn't be able to get out of the deep hole she had fallen into. Kola helped Lila find a new job in the field she had experience in. He didn't give her money, but he showed her the way. Starting with small steps, Lila slowly regained her confidence and resilience. Despite the difficulties, she had learned how to start over. That evening, Kola stood alone in the shop, surrounded by the cars he was fixing and the simple objects around him. He looked up at the night sky, where the stars twinkled, and felt a deep loneliness, though he never spoke of it. He didn't regret leaving Lila, but the stillness in his life sometimes left him feeling drained. In the quiet of the night, Kola turned to his faith. He bowed his head in prayer, not to ask for anything for himself, but to find peace in his soul. "God, I thank you for helping me overcome these trials," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I didn't know how to love, didn't know how to keep the things that mattered. But I'm learning to rise again. I need strength to keep going, to help others, and to never lose myself." Kola continued, "I don't ask for anything for myself anymore. I just ask you to give me the strength to hold on to my faith and patience. No matter how things change, I want to keep the peace in my heart." He lifted his head and looked toward the distant lights of Lagos. A sense of relief slowly spread through him. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me the chance to start over." Lila didn't go back to Kola, but every time she looked back on what she had been through, she felt the growth and the profound lessons she had learned from her mistakes. She had lost so much, but in the end, she found real value in herself. Kola helped her realize that forgiveness isn't a gift given by others, but something each person must learn to give to themselves. Lila's life gradually returned to normal. She no longer sought validation from the outside world. Instead, she had learned to love herself and face life's challenges with greater strength. As for Kola, he continued on his path. Steel Forge grew stronger every day, but now, he wasn't just working to survive, he was working to build a legacy. He had found peace in his work and in his heart, and now he knew that the most important thing was to live true to himself. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to hit like to show your support and subscribe so you won't miss any other moving and meaningful stories. We're always here to share deep life lessons that help us grow stronger and more resilient. Stay tuned to explore more inspiring journeys.